Hi, my name is Kevin Boyle and I am the author of Hit It With a Bigger Hammer. I had not planned to leave the security industry as it had been my chosen profession for 20 years, but I had also not planned to develop a prevention solution that would put me at odds with the security industry. Leaving it was not my choice, and it was an unwelcome consequence of my work in the new field of prevention. At the time I came out of Carter's, I had worked in executive security management for 20 years. In this role, I did not need to obtain a private investigator's license that was required to publicly advertise investigative services. And because I had switched my focus from investigation to prevention, it did not fit the description of a private investigator. However, I believed I needed to work within the security industry to promote my new prevention solution. I sought legal advice around my status that confirmed I did not need a private investigator's license. My prevention role conflicted with security management, and it would be a conflict of interest to market myself in both disciplines. There was another reason I did not wish to obtain a private investigator's license, and this is couched in my book, Hit It With a Bigger Hammer. I advertised in the yellow pages under the private investigator section on the advice of its lawyers, as there was no listing heading for prevention management. I was able to work with clients I had previously worked for while working in security management. These were subsidiaries of the companies I had worked in, and they were happy to continue to use my services. It was a difficult period for me as I continued to promote my new solution without the support of an enduring Carter's model. Business owners and managers were understandably reluctant to pioneer my new solution as they were wary of its demise in Carter's. Notwithstanding, I was able to convince 4 different companies of its merits. I got as far as addressing and getting enthusiastic responses from the employees in these companies who chose to adopt the solution. All had experienced historical loss problems, and I had previously been involved in investigating them. However, soon afterwards, each of these companies had changed ownership and/or management, who were now not prepared to adopt and pioneer my solution. I identify the companies in my book, and I understand their reasons for their reluctance. It was being continually reinforced to me how vulnerable and susceptible the new solution was to the vagaries of change management. Now, this was again disappointing, but it was never rejection of the solution itself that never got the chance to prove itself. It was simply reluctance to be a guinea pig or the pioneer of a new method, particularly as it opposed security management that was now accepted best practice in commerce. I was also better understanding the difficulties of effecting change with little or no resource, apart from my own experience and success of the solution in Carter's. However, that success alone ensured my ongoing determination. All around me, I was constantly aware of the methods of private investigators who were capitalizing on a burgeoning market for their investigative services to investigate and prosecute offending employees in the workplace. It was during this time that I read an article on the front page of our national newspaper that encouraged employees to dob a workmate on a confidential telephone hotline provided by a local private investigator. I wrote to the editor of the paper, questioning his editorial license to sanction the offensive feature article on the front page of his newspaper, when it should have been consigned to the advertising section at the rear. I also suggested he contact me to investigate a new innovative solution to workplace theft that eliminated the need to encourage employees to dob in their workmates. Instead of contacting me, the editor printed my letter in the next edition of his newspaper. I was unaware of this until a policeman knocked on my door to investigate me for operating in the security industry without a private investigator's license. Ironically, I had been dobbed in by the private investigator whose Dobber Workmate confidential hotline had featured in the newspaper. I was angered that he had taken such a step, but not surprised with his method of making a sneaky complaint behind my back where he asked to remain anonymous. After all, it was symptomatic of the ideology he employed. However, I was able to identify him because the investigating policeman was sympathetic, and he inadvertently left his file open on the page identifying the private investigator as the complainant, also symptomatic of policing. I cover the incident more fully in my book, but I do not name the private investigator, who after all was just doing his job. It would have been better had he confronted me face to face to debate our differences, and also to inquire as to why I did not have a private investigator's license. The policeman conducting the investigation accepted the legal advice I had received and deemed I had no case to answer. He did, however, offer advice that I obtain a private investigator's license just to avoid future confusion. It was sound advice, but the underhand action of the private investigator was symptomatic of the methods I was railing against, and this, together with the growing frustration I was experiencing in promoting my solution in commerce, caused me to review my future in the security industry. I decided not to apply for a private investigator's license. Although I was a competent investigator, I was in conflict with security management's ability to prevent offending. I decided to leave the industry and promote my alternative prevention solution from outside its realm. I discuss my future employment more fully in the book, Hit It With a Bigger Hammer. Suffice to say here that it afforded me welcome respite from the frustration I was experiencing, and it provided me more freedom and scope to consider alternative options. It did not take long for another opportunity to present itself. It came in the form of Hansi Cronje, the respected South African cricket captain who in 2000 was exposed for match fixing in cricket. I had not before considered sport as a possible vehicle for my new prevention solution, but Cronje's offending in sport appeared to fit like a hand into a glove over the same circumstances my solution successfully prevented in commerce. And the more I considered it, the more it became clear to me that sport was at a defining time in its history, as it had not yet experienced corruption on a wider and more serious scale, and it had not yet been fully immersed in security management to prevent the offending. Sport was at the same point commerce was in New Zealand 20 years earlier, when I left policing to pioneer security management in New Zealand commerce. Match fixing in cricket was a new phenomenon that represented a new and dark threat to sport. It was not only a defining time for cricket, but for all sport that was awaiting cricket's direction as to how it was going to proceed. I was probably the only person on the planet to foresee the risk of introducing security management to cricket to prevent the match fixing. I knew it would fail, but I also knew it would portend its incremental expansion into other sports if it got a foothold. I was certainly the only person on the planet to propose an alternative solution to the ICC. I knew it would appoint a super cop to conduct the investigation into Cronje, as such an appointment was expected. The ICC was under immense pressure to be seen to be hitting match fixing with the biggest hammer it could find, and the super cop was the only hammer available to them. My concern was that an investigation is the classic forerunner to establishing security management, on the recommendation of the super cop, in the same way security management was introduced to New Zealand commerce 20 years ago. I knew I was up against it, but it presented as a seminal opportunity to introduce my prevention solution to sport prior to security management gaining a foothold. I would not get another comparable opportunity. I proposed my solution to the ICC through New Zealand cricket, taking the opportunity to justify my proposal on what I explained were the failings of security management. My proposal was well received by the then CEO of New Zealand Cricket, Christopher Doig, who saw its merit, and he agreed to table it at the upcoming ICC meeting in London, where the match-fixing problem would be discussed and a management strategy going forward would be decided. I was naturally thrilled with this outcome, as it represented a significant advancement for my solution. This alone justified my decision to leave the constraints of the security industry. However, I knew that my proposal was unlikely to succeed, particularly in the initial investigation phase where I had proposed to conduct the investigation into Cronje's match fixing. I knew cricket administrators, stakeholders, players and supporters were baying for Cronje's blood, and I knew a highly ranked, recently retired police officer would be appointed to conduct the investigation. My proposal warned that a high-profile, prosecution-driven investigation of this nature would drive all information and evidence of the match fixing underground and render possible prosecutions unlikely. My investigation alternatively proposed to include Cronje and other players involved in the match fixing and glean all possible information of the match fixing from them. If this did not produce evidence enough to prosecute the perpetrators, it would at least provide more information about the match fixing that would be of great assistance to better manage the problem. It is well documented what transpired. A super cop was appointed to investigate the match fixing. His investigation failed to prosecute anyone, and after the failed investigation he recommended security management be installed in the ICC to manage the problem. This was adopted and he was appointed head of the security division. Security management failed to prevent ongoing match fixing, and the only thing it did prevent was the players' involvement in managing the match fixing. 10 years later, after the Pakistan spot fixing scandal in England, the now retired super cop declared the players needed to lead in the fight against match fixing, that the players were integral to its successful prevention. He had incredulously blamed the ICC for failing to include the players in managing the problem. Apart from being a resounding endorsement of my solution, his unwarranted criticism of the ICC proved that he is unaware that it is his own policing ideology that prevented the players' involvement. I have not yet discussed how my own proposal was received by the ICC and what happened to it after the ICC meeting in London. This was also an interesting outcome, but one that was never publicised, and it will perhaps surprise you. I will be discussing this and other interesting consequences in my next video. Don't miss it.